I get those goosebumps every time you come around, yeah. You ease my mind, you make everything feel fine. Worry about those comments, I'm way too numb, yeah. It's way too dumb, yeah. I get those goosebumps every time I need the Heimlich, throw that to the side, I get those goosebumps every time, yeah. When you're not around, when you throw that to the side, I get those goosebumps every time, yeah. 713 through the 281, yeah, I'm riding. Why they on me? Why they on me? I'm flying, sipping low key. I'm sipping low key and honest, fine rider. I get those goosebumps every time you come around, yeah. You ease my mind, you make everything feel fine. Worry about those comments, I'm way too numb, yeah. It's way too dumb, yeah. I get those goosebumps every time I need the Heimlich, throw that to the side, I get those goosebumps every time, yeah. When you're not around me, throw that to the
side. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Loaded Mag NUFC. We are back again for another fully transfer show special. An athletic special, should we say. And we're going to get into it all tonight, all things Newcastle United. So get your questions in for Jacob and us boys, and we'll make sure that we get all things answered. And it's great to see so many in the chat already. That's a PDK. Great to see you in the chat. Hope you are well, fella. David Cook, we've got Lisa, of course. Craig Lee, as always, and Jordy 2 for life. He's always in here and always supporting the channel. And Yano's just snuck in. Not to say hello to us, but say hello to Lisa. I saw that. We saw that, and Jules in here. Welcome, Jules. But boys, how are we? Daz, Chris, how are you boys tonight?
I'm good, Pete. All good, all good. Big pod on the Tyne fan myself. As you know, we were also bouncing off each other on what was said on the shows, and with George, Chris, Taylor, and the new guy, Jacob. So he's added to the mix and the dynamic that the guys have. So really interested in talking to Jacob, and it's nice that Chris is going to have a buddy on the show.
I forgot about that.
We didn't forget. But no, look, it's going to be a good one. And look, let's get started. And welcome in Jacob Whitehead from the Athletic and Pod of the Tyne. Here he is.
Here's Jacob.
How you doing,
Hello,
Jacob?
how's it going?
All good.
To make my Loaded Mag debut.
Yes, it is. You're not the first. You're not the first person from the Athletic in the Pod in the Time to come on to Loaded Mag NUFC. Chris Woff has been on, I think, twice actually. Previously. So you're not the first, but look, this is your debut, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you on our channel tonight. But how are things with you in general?
All good. Recently back from the Women's World Cup, so adapting to life back in the Northeast, which is very enjoyable. I haven't spent a summer in Newcastle before, so just quite enjoying the weather, the pubs, all of that. Yeah,
good stuff. And it was only right to touch on it because you were there, you've been covering it, and you did a piece as well around it. Obviously, unfortunately, the Lionesses didn't win the World Cup. They put up a great effort and put in a real good tournament, considering the circumstances, a number of injuries to key players. But how was it covering the Women's World Cup over there, and what was the general feeling, with regards to the World Cup final and the defeat in general?
It's great being over there. First World Cup for me. I think it was kind of fascinating because obviously England have had all these challenges, but at the same time, they're this incredibly well-funded nation compared to lots of the other teams competing. Yet, kind of for the first 2 weeks I was out there, it was kind of like, what next is going to go wrong? Kind of, you had the bonuses row, you had Mary Earps' shirt sponsor, you had another injury, you had Lauren James's Reds. And still, they kept going on. And the fact that they overcame all these things, I think everyone kind of expected, they're going to make it happen in the final. And that was almost a sadness that it didn't.
Yeah, definitely. But they made us all proud, and they put in a fantastic effort. And I was watching it with my daughter, who was screaming and cheering them on. But it was a great final all round, and Spain, deserved winners in the end.
Yeah, very much.
Great with the fact that you got to cover that and be a part of that journey for sure. And it's always good to touch on women's football, because it is growing, and in particular with Newcastle, we are growing our women's team as well. And it was great that they're represented in the Cellar Cup the other week. So
yeah, well, it should have been their first professional game at the weekend, but delayed due to Halifax. But that is coming up next weekend instead, I believe, and will be very exciting.
Definitely, you're absolutely right. But look, I wanted to get your thoughts before we talk. A little bit of transfers, a little bit of other conversation. Newcastle played Man City at the Etihad on Saturday. Lots of excitement around it. We covered it on our review last night. What did you make of Newcastle's performance and the result in general? There's been a little bit of sort of fallout on the back of it from some sections of the fan base. But what did you make of Newcastle's performance at the weekend?
I'm pretty positive about it. I think maybe more than lots. It's hard. The reason why the challenges are going to one of the best club sides in the world, if not the best. And sometimes you just got to accept that team are going to play really well. They threw things at Newcastle which they hadn't seen before. I think it's probably been discussed kind of what they did in their midfield, which, Eddie Howe's 4-3-3 is pretty fluid, but what Pep Guardiola's doing is a whole different level. And they actually managed to keep City at bay for quite a lot of it. I mean, they scored once, kept Haaland pretty quiet. I think the XG kind of showed that they're good value for their one goal. You're going to get a couple of chances to score, and it ultimately is Newcastle's technical quality which let them down there. But in terms of sort of game plan and commitment, I actually think they're on the right track. They just snatched it slightly and were slightly too concerned about the numbers which City was sending from all sorts of directions, but the number 8 didn't maybe join the attack to offer that fluidity which you might normally have. But yeah, I don't think there's any great negative. I don't think there should be any great negativity to it. I think ultimately got beaten by an outstanding City performance led by Foden and Kovacic, actually, who's gone under the radar a bit.
Definitely. And what was really interesting on the back of that, and boys, I'm going to come to you with a separate point in just a second. But what was interesting, you wrote a piece on the back of the sort of the result, and it talked about how trying to emulate Guardiola, which I found quite fascinating, and you've talked about it in a little bit of detail. What is there? I mean, I don't know if you want to expand on your article a little bit more, but it was really, really interesting how you've kind of talked about Eddie Howe's rise and what he's trying to build at Newcastle. If you want to talk about that a little bit more, to add to that, what do you think he needs to do next in order to take that next step, to be considered not alongside Pep, but certainly get closer to him?
Yeah, for sure. I guess some of the premise was that when Pep arrived at City and Howe arrived at Newcastle, they were taking over teams at opposite ends of the table. But in terms of the major steps which they've had to take, those big steps were quite similar. It was kind of being quite ruthless with certain members of the squad. It was to do with improving players who were already there. It was to do with getting the squad younger. And tactically, there are similarities. They're both kind of like exploring the 4-3-3, as we've already discussed, to the very limits of it. And I asked Howe about this in the post-match presser, and he was quite guarded. It was quite entertaining. Asked him what he'd learnt, and maybe it's probably because he's in a bit of grump because of defeat, didn't want to engage too much, and asked him for specifics. He said too many to go into at length and speak to here, which might have been him saying, be quiet and let me sulk after the loss, but equally might have genuinely, if I take him at face value, there will be tons of stuff. We know how intently he watches football. Every top team, Howe will have probably lifted. Like Newcastle are probably a bit of a cut shop job of the elite teams of the last 5 years. That's not any sort of insult. That's just people steal ideals from everyone the whole time. That's how football develops. Newcastle are no different. And I just think Pep's potentially got more traces of him in how than plenty of other managers do. In terms of asking what he can do to get to that sort of level is a massive question. Pep has been defined by the trophy he won early at Barcelona. For really changing stuff tactically, I suppose for how it's putting more fluidity into this Newcastle team. We've maybe seen a team who has a plan A and a plan B in the last couple of years, and they're very good plan A's and plans B's. It's just having that real range of solutions. I think it's adding more depth, which he's starting to get. We can come on to this later, but I thought it was pretty mental that Newcastle's bench looks stronger than Man City's on paper.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's process and time and experience. I mean, Howe is still relatively a young manager. Like he's, there's time to develop.
Yeah, definitely. Boys, I'm going to come to you with regards to this. Obviously, Jacob wrote a really good piece about the sort of the comparisons of Howe and Pep and how sort of how is rising through his sort of managerial career at Newcastle. But I want to get your points on can you see the comparisons of what Howe is doing alongside Pep? But also I wanted to ask your opinions on another aspect of it as well, and it's these two, and you can talk about either one or both, Bruno Guimaraes and Miguel Almiron, because there are some sections of the fan base that have been giving them a little bit of stick after the game on Saturday. We've kind of touched on the game and reviewed it and gave our opinions of their performance, but firstly about how and Pep's kind of comparison, but also, what have you made of some of the stick that those boys have been getting, as I say, from sections of the fan base? Chris, I'll start with you.
So touching first on Howe and the Pep comparison, like for me, I think there is traits of that Eddie Howe has picked up from Pep Guardiola. And the fact that Pep came out after the game, we've probably all seen the quotes, and I loved it today when I seen it when Pep was saying that if they played open against Newcastle, Newcastle would have destroyed Man City. So that was really nice to see, and I think there's a lot of respect there. But as much as I've seen traits of Howe's game plan from Pep, I wanted to actually touch a little bit on Klopp. Because I think, and I've been saying this to my mates now for the past 2 or 3 months, that I believe that we are the new Liverpool of 3 or 4 years ago. Because the way we're so intense, and the way that we press, and the way that we're all energy, I actually believe now that we are the new Liverpool, and that we're the team that people used to go to Anfield and they were petrified. I think now St. James's Park's like that. St. James's Park's the cauldron, and I think that I actually see more matches with Jurgen Klopp than I do with Pep. I think everybody aspires to be like Pep, and I don't, I'm not for 1 minute suggesting, that Klopp's better than Pep or Pep's better than Klopp, but I actually think that Eddie Howe is kind of probably looked at numerous managers, the likes of Simeone, which we know he's looked at when he was in his downtime from being at, when he left Bournemouth. But I actually see most similarity with Klopp's previous team from, as I say, 3 or 4 years ago. In terms of the Miggy and Bruno one, I'll touch on both briefly. It was interesting, actually, because when we were giving our scores out, and I'm not sure, Jacob, if you've seen it, but of the 2 players that we focused on most were those 2 players when we were giving our scores, because for me, maybe I was a little bit critical of Bruno, but I just think with Bruno, he's not quite been himself for a while now. That's not to say he's a bad player, and even a 70-80% Bruno is probably better than the majority of 100% players. But for me, I feel like going forward, Bruno cannot stay in this number 6 position. I just don't think it suits him. And us lads have spoken about that for a while now. It's not to say that I don't like Bruno or that I don't rate Bruno, because I absolutely do. I think he's terrific. But I actually think that Bruno, Eddie Howe needs to do something with the midfield, or perhaps, try and shift things around a little bit, because I just don't see Bruno in the number 6 long term. In terms of Miggy Almiron, it's the same conversation, isn't it? We constantly go on about it and say, he's work rate, effort, unrivaled. But the difficulty with Miggy Almiron is it's that end product, and the fact that he's so reliant on his left foot, and teams are kind of sussing him out. Yes, he had that purple patch last season and he was brilliant, but that only lasted so long. And I think this season's going to be really big for them. And I think if Miggy doesn't kind of find that form that he found previously, he could very quickly find himself on the bench, in my opinion, because I think he'd be a great impact sub. But I just wonder long term whether he's gonna do enough to stay in this team, because we're progressing so quickly.
No, great points. Daz, again, the Howe-Pep comparison, what's your opinion on that? But also, as Chris has talked about, the two alternatives. Did you have a ghost behind you, Chris?
Our Callum.
Honestly, that threw me big time. But I'm sorry, Daz, go for it.
Yeah, I think it's you're not really comparing apples with apples there, because when Pep came in, Man City were already number 1 in the Premier League, and the goal was to win the Champions League, which he did. So and if you think about it, when Eddie Howe came in, he was Newcastle were 19th, they even dipped to 20th, and then he turned them around. So for apples with apples, I think Pep would have to take over. Who's bottom of the Premier League at the moment?
Well, it is Everton.
Pep would have to take over Everton, Jacob, I think, and then for the like for like comparison. But I'm only joking. No, it is difficult to compare there. And in relation to Bruno and Miggy, yeah, I myself, I was. Miggy was doing really well. Then he dipped. I said, get him off the pitch. Then he actually picked it up again, and I was glad he didn't come off, because he was one that looked like he was going to create something. Okay, and he keeps passing to Trippier, passing to someone else as well, and it's all very familiar what he does. But he was really trying to give a solid effort. And Bruno, I think Bruno, as we said yesterday, Bruno, he's only his second proper game with Tonali that let them get that relationship established and know what each other is doing, and be able to dovetail each other on the number 6-8 position. So I think it's early days, and give him a chance. Bruno will come back to himself.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with both your points about Bruno and Miggy. We can say, people are allowed to say they had a bad game. That's people's opinion. We are more than right to say it. I personally didn't think any of us were harsh on either of those players with our scores and our opinions. But when but some of the comments on social media, I don't know if you've seen any of them, Jacob, on socials, but some of them are basically sort of writing them off already, sort of second game in. It seems a little bit far-fetched, doesn't it?
I remember when I first started doing Newcastle, one of my first matches was the Sheffield Wednesday Cup match, and the amount of vitriol on social media saying that Jacob Murphy needed to never play for Newcastle again after that. And you saw the influence he had on the second half of the season and the importance he had. That is exactly the same situation here.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely. Now, we haven't touched on the fact that, you said you kind of been with us since sort of like January, and you've been on Pod of the Tyne, and you're on the podcast, which is a fantastic podcast, I have to say. Really enjoy listening to it, as does someone right next to me. But Daz, I didn't know if you wanted to talk to Jacob with regards to Pod on the Tyne and his work at the Athletic.
Yeah, look, Jacob, I have many questions, but I have one major question, and like you feel comfortable now, so I can ask this question. How would you describe George Culkin?
Chris is his own man. He's an individual. There aren't too many people like him, but that's what makes him such a brilliant writer. Somebody who's got the depth of passion for the club, which he does, and the depth of knowledge with which to write that from. And I think you can see from his work in the foundation how much he dearly cares about the club and covering it, and also that sometimes involves holding the club to account. And which Newcastle fans have a lot of experience doing. But yeah, we're very lucky to have him, and if not just for his remarkable ability to string together insults and swear words and strange quotes for anyone who listened to our last episode.
Exactly. Now, if we were to all just kind of gaze off into the distance, you can imagine how George would describe himself. I think it's something like this:
I am a magnificent eagle soaring from the hills. I come down. If you want to cry, I'll fucking make you cry, right? I'll do that. If you want to laugh, I'll have a go at making you laugh. I'll try and do that. If you want misery, I am your man, or eagle, stroke eagle. If you want misery is my mantra. That's where I'm most comfortable.
It's not your version of
but I'll try and give identity. You. I'll give you the soaring, sweeping emotion.
Yeah, I mean that's not put on. That's just Tuesday night at the pub with George. So what you see is what you get.
Most definitely.
Cheers, Jacob.
No, brilliant stuff. But how has it been? In all honesty, joining the crew. Obviously, you got Taylor, you got Chris, and obviously George in there. How has it been sort of settling in? Not only on Pod of the Time, but settling in, sort of writing and working alongside those guys, because they are fantastic at what they do. How has it been sort of in that transitional period for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess I tended to not do club reporting before, so writing for an audience is very different. Generally prefers doing investigations and news and that sort of stuff. And you knew from following Newcastle just kind of the quality that they're operating with, and also just how funny the podcast is, and trying to fit into that. And I think there's an extent to which I couldn't come in and sort of be like, I can't pretend to be a Newcastle fan or have that length of knowledge. I mean, they take the piss out of me because last week I didn't know. I didn't know who Darren Peacock was. I can't pretend to be a Newcastle fan, and so I think I've just got to kind of try and be my own guy on it, and hopefully some of that is when they can be a little bit rah-rah Newcastle, be a little bit of levity in that sense. But yeah, hopefully I can add a little bit to it, even if it's just bullying George as to use a double pivot, which he has actually now started writing. So it's a small victory.
You do add to it, Jacob. Let me tell you, you do. It's a different dynamic, but it's a good one. So keep up the good work.
Cheers.
Right, moving on slightly. So, wanted to sort of talk about the transfer window. So, at this moment in time, with what is it, a week and a half? I think
10 days.
Maybe, just under 2 weeks away from the window shutting. We've got Sandro Tonali as our first signing coming in. Obviously, Minter came in and was loaned straight out to Feyenoord. Harvey Barnes was next in line, and then more recently, Tino Livramento, who made his debut at the Etihad, coming on a sub late in the game.
On the wing.
On the wing, yes, which we did talk about in our loaded chat. It was a conversation that we had that it may well happen at some point. Him coming on the right wing. So, but we're still waiting on one other. Still, as of nearly 8 o'clock, 3 minutes to 8, still not been announced yet, and that's Lewis Hall's loan move from Chelsea to Newcastle United, and I think one of your athletic friends, David Ornstein, sort of broke it along with I think Sam Wallace, that this deal was going to be agreed and there was a medical in place. Where, in your opinion, is it just a case of we're just waiting for the announcement now? And what do you make, Jacob, of this particular deal of Lewis Hall signing for Newcastle?
Well, yeah, I think everything, no reason to be concerned. He had his medical on Friday. He was at the game on Saturday. And I don't think Newcastle, I know you've been saying that people have been, I know some people have been saying Newcastle have been playing poorly, but I don't think it's such a disaster that he'll have suddenly changed his mind. So yeah, it should be happening soon. I really rate him as a player. It's interesting because he does have relatively limited minutes, but it's interesting who those minutes came against. He played against Manchester United, Manchester City, Liverpool, and Newcastle. There's sort of almost that's 360 minutes out of his 500 coming against elite opposition, and he really was not shown up. I mean, compare his performance against Riyad Mahrez compared to Cucurella, and it is light and day. Light and day? Night and day, that's the phrase.
We do.
And also his versatility. I mean, I know he's been playing left back in the Chelsea senior team, but this is a guy who's basically played everywhere coming through the Chelsea Academy. I think he won Chelsea Academy Player of the Season, playing a mix of centre-back, left wing and midfield. I think he said that midfield's his favourite position. And so he's been signed as a left-back predominantly for that. But you could also see a world in which he's used him at left-sided number 8 role as an option, or potentially as he kind of, as he develops. So that's all exciting. And financially, it's also a deal which suits Newcastle. I'll have an article coming out on this in The Athletic tomorrow, but the club have said throughout that, they're up against FFP and keep seeming to find money down the back of the FFP sofa. And they've done it again here by kind of effectively having a loan of an obligation, knocks it on to register it next year. Chelsea are happy with it because we all know how much they've spent. I think the fact I heard about it today was they spent 300 million on midfielders in 2023 alone, which is probably the amount Everton have spent in the last kind of decade. But yeah, actually, Everton haven't had spending money is not Everton's problem.
I was thinking, are you meaning this before the takeover? Definitely.
Yeah, no, true. That's true. That's true. So yes, so back to the original. I've waffled on here, but yeah, basically, I think that Lewis Hall is a pretty exciting signing. When I looked at the 4 left backs who Newcastle had been looking at this window, he was the one who probably had the fewest weaknesses to his game. He's still so young. He's 18. I mean, like, people like Kuol and Minter who are being signed for the kind of future, going out on a couple of loans. I mean, Hall's, I don't know exactly to the dates, but he's the same age as them and going straight into first team squads. I mean, like, he's malleable. It's exciting.
Definitely. I'm going to ask you a question, Chris. Lewis Hall, I'm putting it out there for you. Can you see Lewis Hall being our starting left back by the end of this season, 23-24?
Yes. I thought you were going to say by the end of the year, and I was going to go, ooh, I don't know. I was going
to say that.
Yeah,
I was going to say it.
Yeah. I think by the end of the season, yeah. But Jacob makes a great point when he says that a lot of us probably haven't considered the fact that he has played in other positions and his preferred position is more central. He's a player, isn't he? That's got it appears that he's got a really high ceiling based on what we've seen of him so far. But I believe once he gets into the team, and especially if it is at left back, once he gets into the team, I think it will be very difficult for Byrne to kind of dislodge him, because I think he's going to come in and just make an immediate impact. So yeah, I'm pretty excited by him. Like as Jacob said, very, very excited. Compared to the other left backs that we've been linked with, we did a show on it, didn't we, boys? And he was the one that we most wanted. And my only hesitation at the minute is just why it's taken so long to announce him. But maybe I'm just being impatient.
No, well, to be fair, I think there's been 1 or 2 deals this summer that have kind of dragged on. I think Tonali's kind of dragged on.
Tonali did, yeah.
Harvey Barnes, it was said that it was pretty much a done deal, and then it was like 2 weeks later before it was actually sort of announced and it was officially kind of done. But I think we're waiting for Maxi, and yeah, to be fair, Livramento took it a bit longer. I think they all have, really. I think we're just an impatient fan base. I think that's the biggest thing. But I'll come to you with the same question. Do you think Lewis Hall will be the starting left back by the end of this season? But I'm going to ask you an addition onto that. What do we do Matty Target?
Yeah, okay, yeah. That's two very simple questions there, Pete. Yeah, I think he will be by the end of the season. And as we kind of touched on before, we can utilize Dan Burn in the centre back position, left centre back position cover as well. So Dan Burn, there's plenty of games, he get plenty of game time still, and he hasn't done much too wrong in his time in left back with us. And the second question was, what was the second question?
Matty Target.
Oh, Matty Target. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I would. I'd actually put Matt Target up for sale, especially when we found out on the show the other night, and we've seen it in the Smore Festival. He's on 100K a week. What? That is absolutely crazy. He's if that is true, he's way ahead of loads of first team starters, which is absolutely crazy. But yeah, I would look to see can we find a buyer for Matt Target. He had a great first season with us when he's on loan. Didn't work out for him last season. I know he had injuries, and Dan Burn made the place his own. But yeah, now we have a bit of cover with Dan Burn that can play there, and we have Alex Murphy as well, who as of yet has not gone out on loan. So there's a bit of cover there.
I think also some people are forgetting kind of how Trippier can cover the left side in a push,
True.
and now Livramento's come onto the right. There's actually a genuine first team option at right back as well. I'm not saying that should be first choice or anything like that, but it just is another option out there.
Exactly.
Jacob, I'll ask you the question because I mentioned it to Daz as well. Do you think it would be viable to sell Matt Target this summer with Lewis Hall coming in? You've got Dan Burn there. You've talked about Trippier playing left back. You know, would it be the right thing to do, or would you think Eddie Howe will want to just hoarding is probably not the right word, but like keep as many players in there as possible as options?
Possibly. Like, I think they signed a left back for a reason. I mean, some of it is, yes, Lewis Hall's a really talented player, but it's not quite the same situation as Livramento, where it is like kind of, here's a can't miss talent. We've just got to go and get him, even if the kind of succession planning isn't quite right. This was more, they felt there's a need, and it's not necessarily purely to do with left back numbers, but also centre back numbers. I mean, if Fabian Schär or Sven Botman gets an injury, yes, you've got the cells, but you've also got shuffling Burn over, which means you do want another left back. And to have to go through the whole season with really just Target there is a bit thin. And so then you throw in Hall into that mix, who's hopefully more of a high ceiling player than Target, and who's a player for the future you want to be giving those minutes to. So yes, it does look like there's a lot of left back depth, but it is all tied in with centre backs, where I don't think there's that much depth, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. And we've talked about it on the channel as well about the centre back situation. In fact, we talked about it yesterday on the review show. So if you haven't watched the review, guys, make sure you click back and watch the Man City review and check that one out. There was another question. I'll come back to it in just a second, but we'll move forward to sort of the next sort of conversation. And to be fair, there's a few in the chat that have already been talking about it, and there's already conversations that are kind of that have been had on the back of this. And it goes and it kind of sits with the Amazon Prime documentary that unfortunately for them was leaked, the episodes 3 and 4 at the weekend for I think just over a 2-hour period. And what it did announce is that, you know, the old school kit suppliers for the Toon Army is coming back. Apparently on the 1st of the 9th, next month, there'll be some form of announcement where we're assuming that this is the case. And maybe, and look, I'll put these up just because we were talking kits last night, boys, is that maybe we'll get some of these bad boys back in the kind of supporters store, the club shop, maybe very, very soon. But look, Jacob, you wrote another article talking about the Adidas becoming Newcastle's new kit manufacturer, and obviously on the back of the leaked documentary. do you think that it's had sort of it's hampered the announcement, the fact that the league's taking place, and in addition to that, what can you see coming next with Adidas, who's a massive kit manufacturer, taking over from Castore as of what we assume is the end of this season?
It's quite funny, isn't it? Like you say leak, it's almost not a leak. It's almost just somebody accidentally pressing the wrong button. Jeff Bezos sort of having one too many pims and getting a bit overexcited at releasing a documentary. So it's obviously reported that they're set to take over from Castore as kit manufacturer. I think the most significant thing is kind of this is going to mean commercially. I mean, you guys will be much better than me at speaking as to kind of the emotional hit of having Adidas back as a sponsor, back as a kit manufacturer. I don't think I was born when it happened, but yeah, from a commercial sense, like Castore's was worth an absolute drop in the ocean. They're one of the smaller clubs in the Premier League, and Newcastle is seeking to maximise their commercial revenues if they can spend more and beat FFP. I mean, I think Spurs I might have got some of these figures slightly wrong, but I think Spurs is up towards 40 million. Newcastle's under Castore was something like 7 million. They probably won't be at that Spurs level yet, just because of purely kind of a number of times in the Champions League, and club profile worldwide is still not quite the same, but getting up closer to that allows them to compete on far much more of an even playing field. That's kind of the technical side of why this deal is seen as such a boost. So Peter Silverstone, who's a chief commercial officer, he was at Arsenal when Arsenal also went over to the Adidas kit, and his links have been really important to getting this deal over the line.
Definitely. And look, we've had conversations about this, haven't we, Chris? We talked about it last night on the show. I think all of us boys talked about it after the show.
We did an hour and a half after last night's show talking about it.
Believe it. You know what? Mrs. weren't happy with me. She was like, when the music came on for the end of the show, she was like, finished early, great. And then we're on for another hour, and she was like, what the hell's going on? We were just chatting away. I think the boys had the kits out, showing everything. No. It was great. Reminiscing, Jacob, about all the old kits and all the old times. That's what we were doing. But Chris, from an emotional level, it's an amazing thing. But as Jacob's talked about, and just use some sort of examples from Tottenham's perspective, we need this, don't we? We need this to take us forward.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I mean, we've said that our commercial revenue has been far too low compared to other clubs, and I'm not even talking about the top 6 clubs. I mean, at one stage, we were quite on par with Tottenham, and it just goes to show what it was like under the Ashley era. The fact that Tottenham are now light years ahead of us. So we're now in a fortunate position on the pitch. I think we're actually now ahead of Tottenham. But for us to get those commercial deals and to be able to improve the players on the pitch even more than what we have, that's without Eddie Howe's fantastic coaching. We can then move on to the next level and the next level. So it's massive. It's massive for the club to be able to pull in such a great kit manufacturer who are world renowned, and hopefully they can make us as a club more world renowned than what we are right now. I'm really excited by it, really excited, and I think it's gonna really kick us on. And what better way than to bring in a previous kit manufacturer who provided us with the kits during arguably one of our most successful eras. So to have them back, and then if they start bringing back the retro kits and everything, that'll just be amazing, and it'll be very nostalgic, but also very exciting for the whole fan base. And I tell you what, I have to gamble with myself here, because in Liverpool we say Adidas, whereas you all say Adidas, and I was saying Adidas, and Lisa was going to me yesterday, why are you saying Adidas? And I was like, well, everyone says Adidas. She's like, no, but we all say Adidas. So I've been really trying to battle with myself. So yeah, Adidas, getting Adidas back in is going to be massive, because they are one of the best in the world. So yeah, I'm really excited.
You tell Lisa from me, Chris. You tell Lisa from me, Chris. It's Adidas. Not Adidas.
Adidas.
So I'm not going to say it because that'll prompt you. You know the one with the tick. How do you pronounce that?
Nike.
I say Nike.
You see, so they do say Nike, not Nike. Some people say
some
Nike.
people do say Nike, don't they?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
We all say Nike. We all say Nike. It's fine.
Yeah, we could agree on that. We could agree on that. Daz, from your perspective, where does this huge potential deal kind of sit? Where does it place us within the elite? Like Chris has made a really good point talking about how, we were effectively, and Jacob, obviously you would have been really young at this point, when we had Sir Bobby Robson in the early 2000s up to 2005, we were finishing regularly above Tottenham Hotspur. And it was only since Mike Ashley took over the club during that era that Tottenham got the better of us and were finishing ahead of us and are seen as part of this big six. Now, I've always said once this takeover took place, the tide is turning, that Tottenham is a team that we're looking at. And Chris, you touched on it, you're absolutely spot on. Where do you think, going back to yourself, Daz, where do you think this big deal with Adidas places amongst the elite?
Okay, so two graphics for you here, Pete. I know you're thinking I'm jumping to the other one first, but if Jacob mentioned Spurs, but if you look, if we want to try to emulate City, and at the moment we're getting 5 million per year from Castori, whereas they're getting 55 million from Puma, if this graphic is accurate. So that's the kind of level we aspire to. Of course, Man United, their deal with Adidas is 90 million a year. So we've a bit to go to get up to those levels. But then it begs the question of with Adidas themselves, where do we appear in their rankings? So if we look at their rankings, there's again another graphic I took from Twitter. I don't know how accurate it is, and whoever created it, either credit to them. But this is the pyramid. If you look at the elites there, you have Man United, Bayern, Arsenal, Real Madrid, and Juventus. In premium, you have Ajax and a number more clubs then as it works way down the pyramid. So where do you think Newcastle are going to land in there? Will Adidas gamble on the future of Newcastle and the trajectory that the project is going in, and stick them in the elite, or building something into the contract that as you go, the deal will grow as well, and there'll be incentives and bonuses on top of that. So that's something I suppose to consider. Just throw it out there. Where do you think this deal, and this is all hypothetical because we don't know that much about it yet, where do you think Newcastle are going to land? Premium or elite?
Ooh. Go on, Jacob, Chris. I'll let you flight this one first, you boys.
I mean, for me, it's premium, but I don't think that's a bad thing. And my reasoning for that is look at the first two teams in there. You've got Ajax and Besiktas, and Ajax absolutely one of the biggest brands in global football still, despite being in this premium category here, and still doing loads of unique stuff. Like, do you remember the Three Little Birds shirt they had last year? It's not like they're kind of being treated as second tier. Besiktas, absolutely massive, and like fan base wise, probably more fans for Newcastle, like just in terms of their size and popularity. It's just in a market we don't necessarily see. The elite ones are very much Champions League regulars. Newcastle could get in there if they're there for the next 10 years, but I think for the moment it'll be very much premium, but I don't think there's a problem in that.
Interesting. I'll throw it. I think I agree, certainly with the Besiktas. I think people overlook them because they're not a team that we see regular, but they are huge in Turkey. Massive with a huge,
bigger than Galatasaray.
They're one of the big three. It's Galatasaray back in Besiktas, and Besiktas is slightly different. They've got a reputation as being kind of a working class one, slightly different part of the city. I think they're the only one on the European side of the city rather than the Asian side of the city. I might be wrong on that, but yes, they're very much one of the Turkish big three who divide up the entire league between them, and it's only really Trabzonspor who are from a different city, who have Trabzon in the east, which are kind of ever sort of threaten that hegemony.
One of the top teams in Turkey, black and white, working class. Remind you of someone? but just in the northeast, maybe. This is what we are. But Chris, where do you see us? I'm going to throw something out there to you, and just to kind of add into that, where you might see us from your perspective. I'm going to say, does the fact that Newcastle are in the Premier League have a factor in where we're placed?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's a good point. I mean, straight away when you showed me the the chart, I was like, yeah, we're elite, obviously. And then Jacob brought me back down to earth. Maybe that's with my black and white rose tinted glasses on. So I think it's fair. What I will say, which I think would be a fairer assessment, I agree with you, Pete, in that obviously the Premier League, biggest league in the world. So obviously that's going to lift us up. But maybe a fair assumption would be to say, we'll tell you what, this 5-year deal that we're going to be signing, that could be as part of a premium package. But then I think if Adidas want to stay with us, then I think that if we carry on in the trajectory that we have, I think we will then definitely be in the elite category, and it could even see that a new 5-year deal, if there was one on the table, would then elevate us even higher. That's probably what I would say at the minute, because if we're consistently getting Champions League or even worst case Europa League, I think then we would definitely be classed in that elite tier. I'd like to think we're in the elite tier now, purely because, as you say, of the Premier League and the fact we sell shirts and we're a one club city. But I can see from the outside looking in that maybe we're not quite there, because there is the likes of Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Man United. They obviously very very big very very big clubs historically, consistently over the last few years, and obviously we fell away in the last 20-25 years. So I can't see why people from the outside looking in would maybe think that we're probably more premium at this moment rather than elite.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know is my answer. I'm not sure. If you look at the clubs in that image at the top, I agree with yourself, Jacob. I agree with yourself, Chris. The premium is the right one to put us in. But I just think that, for example, if we the agreement's there that they're going to be our kit manufacturer next season, but we don't know that deal has been signed and sealed. It could well be, and I'm just putting out an opinion here. It could well be that it's agreed, and a deal is agreed, and a price is agreed based on where we finish in the league. So if we get Champions League again, could that mean that the money goes up? If we get Europa League, certain fee, conference, certain fee, out of Europe, certain fee. So
that is how these deals typically work. And I think Manchester United had issues when they didn't qualify for the Champions League with their kit deal. That I think for the first year they might have had a grace period, and the second year then that meant it went down. But yes, those things are pretty regular, and I'd be surprised at the level which they're operating at now if there wasn't something like that in case. Maybe think of it as like an incentive rather than any sort of penalty. But yeah.
So I'm not sure where our place is. Like, those clubs are massive clubs in the elite, but let's see from that perspective. Chris, I think you've got a question for Jacob.
Yeah, very quick one, Jacob. This stemmed from our conversation last night after the show, and I know we kind of touched on it very briefly during the show, but it would just be interesting to hear your thoughts on it. I mean, I asked the question yesterday, or put it out there yesterday, that the deal's been announced allegedly on the 1st of September. We've seen obviously the graphics and stuff like that, saying that the Adidas deal is going to be announced on the 1st of September. And we've seen that because people who've seen episodes 3 and 4 of the documentary obviously are aware of that. What I wanted to ask was, do you think there's any significance in it being the 1st of September, with that being the transfer deadline day closure? Now, I know people said, oh, the reason it's that is because that's when the 4th episode come out. But what I understand, that's when the 4th episode was due to come out. But what I wanted to know was whether there was any significance in them releasing it on the 1st of September, because that is the transfer deadline day. What I'm asking is, do you think that there could be any way linked to, a big transfer dropping or a big announcement being made? Or do you think that's just a coincidence?
I think it's I don't think it's going to have an impact on a transfer deal, but it is obviously a significant date, both for the transfer deadline day. I mean, so there's lots of eyes on them, but I think more significantly, it's the day after the Champions League draw. Everyone's going to be crazy excited about the Champions League, and then all of a sudden, great, here's Adidas, here's the final episode. Like the interest, you've just heard, right? We're off to the Bernabeu. Oh, let's all wear our Adidas club, whatever. I think that's more of a significance for me, and the fact that the final episode was due to come out the day after is, I think, was probably designed with that in mind.
No, interesting. Right, we're coming to the question section now of the show. We've got just a tiny bit more time with Jacob before he has to leave. So, any questions in the chat that you want to fire at Jacob?
There are, and Chris took about 5 or 6 of them there with these questions. People ask Chris, are you playing the piano as well? The way you're angled looks like you are playing the piano at certain times. But okay,
we need to clip that.
No, we don't.
Let's go to one here from David Cook and Jacob. Okay, you've kind of half ruled out any incomings, but any news about outgoings? Now we know there's a number like Fraser and plenty of them that are Jeff Henrik and a number that we could offload, or we're looking to move on to some degree. Anything you've heard on that front?
It's all pretty quiet. I mean, obviously there is this core group of players we know they're looking to move out. It's a slow market. There's been interest in Fraser. I haven't heard of that much interest in Hayden and Hendrick. Often this stuff does tend to come around quite late in the windows, where with all due respect to them, they probably aren't that many people's first choice solutions as a signing. So they're sort of players you maybe come back to and you're like plan B, plan C. And in the final days of a window, you start to kind of get those sorts of deals rolling through. There's always, last window we saw a couple of curveballs in terms of Wood and Shelby departing the club. Now I don't have any knowledge as to suggesting that's going to happen, but sometimes offers come in, and with Newcastle's FFP situation, it might be something which they want to take up, and that could kind of tempt them back into the market again. I think House said that their own incoming transfer business is done without that outgoing. So just like, we know how weird this kind of season is, as in terms of this transfer season. Stuff is so ridiculously fluid. Hopefully, they're done. Hopefully I want a nice, easy, quiet life. And so I'm hoping that their kind of incomings are mostly done at this point, but outgoings could affect that.
No problem, Jacob. I know you're looking after yourself there. You want a nice, relaxing transfer deadline day. But
the 2 days before deadline day. I don't want to be working on that.
Happy birthday, Jacob. Shane Mawson, for one of our loaded ultras from down under. He asks, "What is your favorite location in Oz since you were there?"
Oh, an excellent question. I really liked running on the South Bank in Brisbane. It was absolutely lovely. But in Sydney, I really liked going around all the suburbs in Sydney. So I really liked going to Newtown. I found a ramen place, which is also a motorbike repair shop, and ended up working in there quite a lot. It's a very odd surrounding, but I really loved that. There's a suburb called Balmain I really liked, which is a short ferry away where I could have very much seen myself working. And then also the England training ground in Terrigal, which is about 90 minutes north of Sydney, was an absolute trek to get to every day, but absolutely gorgeous. Kind of, you're taking the train through these kind of, I think it's where all the koalas live, in these kind of untouched forests, going through them on the train and kind of these deltas, and that was gorgeous. I'm quite a countryside boy. And so kind of after being in cities for most of the month, sort of that little excursion, I always really enjoyed, yeah.
Cool. Oh, you had a good answer, good detailed answer on that one. Nice one.
I want to be a travel journalist at heart.
Gary asked the question. He mentions about PIF. Do you think that PIF will influence Adidas in what position in that pyramid we may sit? But I suppose also link into the fact that whatever deal we do have with Adidas, that it needs to go past Premier League regulations as well. So, any thoughts on that though? Would PIF be able to sway anything?
I'm not sure they'd have that much sway with Adidas themselves. I mean, kind of we know kind of the size of some of the corporations who Adidas are dealing with. Obviously, Newcastle are a more attractive financial proposition because of them. Sorry, what's the second part of that question? Again, I was going to come back to it.
Would they have any kind of sway in where they would sit in that potential pyramid of we're looking at there of the different clubs, like premium and elite clubs?
Yeah, not so much influencing that, but I just think that. Sorry, there's another part of the question which you asked before that I was going to come back to, which I've completely forgotten about, because I disagreed about the going back about the I disagreed about the influence. There's nothing I did agree with, but I'm sure I will remember it. I think it is also interesting. I mean, Adidas are obviously a massive brand, whether they influence the kind of there being the Saudi kits at all, which obviously is not controversial, and whether they kind of have any say in stopping that, whether they see that as something which might damage their brand. Whereas Castor is a new brand, possibly that didn't come into it. I know it's not always the merriest thing to be talking about, but it might be a consideration. But yeah, so these are nerdy geopolitical questions.
We'll move on. We'll get to one that Dan asks, and Dan asks, Jacob, how worried are you about your lot this season? Your lot, I'm assuming he means Everton.
Very. Luckily, I wasn't watching the Villa game because I was on the train back from the covering the Women's World Cup final. I stayed in Manchester overnight to cover the Women's World Cup final there, and then got the train back to Newcastle. And I gather it was pretty dire. I was considering watching Match of the Day 2 later, but I don't think that's going to happen. We've been circling the drain for a couple of years. I find it so weird how quickly this has all kind of fallen to pieces. Yeah, it feels pretty hopeless. I prefer to have a little bit of pluck, and sort of I've been telling Chris we're staying up, mainly because that makes my life a bit fun. I like sort of laying a little bet for him, and seeing as this is about all we've got is that we don't get relegated, I might as well kind of slap that trophy onto my back. So yeah, I'll say that we'll stay up, but I am deeply, deeply worried and don't know if I truly believe it.
I'll throw in another one, or Everton related one. How do you feel about Che Adams potentially rocking up at Everton? And did you know someone is trying to influence that decision? Someone to my that there, because Pete knows Che Adams.
The way I've seen it justified is that although he may not score loads and loads of goals, he does facilitate players around him scoring in terms of his hold-up play and his link-up play. Yeah. And without that is obviously Calvert-Lewin's main strength. I know Calvert-Lewin probably is a more natural goal scorer. We saw that in sort of more recent seasons. But without Calvert-Lewin, we weren't really able to play the way that we wanted to, because like people like Mopé, Dobbin, even Sims last season are very different styles of player. Having Adams means that without Calvert-Lewin, which we aren't, which realistically we probably won't have lots of times, he does allow us to kind of stay in that shape. And if he can do that and chip in with kind of 8-10 goals a season for the price it is, 15 million, it's not a bad deal.
Do you think Dyche will see the season out, Jacob?
Sorry?
Do you think Dyche will see the season out?
If there's one thing which isn't helping us, it is kind of turbulence. And Dyche has kind of been in these situations before. He does know how to help fix the defence. I mean, there's an argument it has got worse, but I'm always pretty resistant to changing managers, and it probably has stung me before, but I'd always rather give him a month too long than a month too few, ultimately. And Dyche at least has been there, got the badges. Yeah.
Last question, so we'll go from Jordy 2 for life. For Jacob and the load of lads, personally against Liverpool, I would play Tonali as number 6, only because he has more speed across the ground than Bruno, and Liverpool do have an excellent front three. Thoughts? Where would you play Tonali, I suppose?
It's interesting. I mean, they sort of already do rotate anyway to an extent. I think Bruno takes the majority of time at number 6, but they sort of have been swapping around in phase play. If you look at the average position maps, they're relatively close together, which shows the extent to which they are cycling between each other. I mean, to be honest, Bruno is 6 slightly in name. There's an argument to which it's kind of, he just kind of toys with the positioning of them, whether it's setting them up deeper or moving the 8s further inside, or, instructions as to his fullback. But as to his fullbacks, and I think that's probably more significant to kind of which lines up in a particular spot in the pitch. But I guess we saw with Joelinton against Leeds last season, they has tried to change it sometimes. It didn't work on that occasion. But yeah, for me, I think it stays as it is in midfield. Ultimately, I think they kept City pretty quiet.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you very much for having me, lads. Really enjoyed that.
No worries.
Thanks,
Thank
Jacob.
you so
Thanks
much,
for joining us.
Jacob.
Nice one.
Just before you go, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at jwhitey98 and on The Athletic. All my stuff's there. I tend to not really use any other social media. But yeah, that is where you'll find me. And of course, on Putnam Tyne. I should give them a plug
Of course.
as well. We'll have a new episode out of that. If it's not already out tonight, it'll be out tomorrow morning. We recorded in person at the Bridge Hotel, which is nice today.
Yes.
So,
Look forward to that one.
yes,
Definitely.
right. Catch you
Jacob,
later,
we're
lads.
going to let you
See
go.
ya.
You
Thanks,
take care.
Jacob.
Thank you, Jacob.
See ya. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right.
Brilliant stuff. Great to have Jacob on. Like I say, made his debut. Good debut.
Very good.
Yeah, solid. Solid.
Very good.
And hopefully we'll potentially get him back soon. Great to have him on. Great chat, great opinions as always. Boys, I've got a question for you. Transfer related as such, I don't know. City Extra today said Man City will loan Calvin Phillips this summer in a bid to get his career back on track. Even with departures, Man City feel they can do without the midfielder for a season in the hope that he can reinvent himself. Now, we talked about on the show last night about, Bruno Guimaraes. Chris, you talked about it tonight, quite rightly. Bruno may not be that guy in that position to hold that number 6. Calvin Phillips on loan. We've been linked with him before. Do you take him? Stop.
Oh, go on.
Oh no, go. Fly away. Boys,
Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
We'll all chip in. Go for it.
Do you know what? You've really intrigued me with this question, Pete. Oh, sorry. Oh, I had something going then. I thought there was a penalty. You've really intrigued me with this question because I hadn't really considered it. And obviously I've heard the rumours about, Man City potentially cashing in on Phillips. But now that you've said all that and your little intro speech there, Pete, I'm thinking, bloody hell, you might be onto something there because we know that we've got another loan that we could utilise. We know if you're Pep Guardiola, you're sitting there and you're thinking, right, you want Calvin Phillips to revitalise his career, you want him to get minutes, and you want him to be coached and play for the team who you rate. Now, after Pep gushing about us in the last 24 hours, if Calvin Phillips is surplus to requirements, and let's be honest, and this isn't me being being cocky in any way, but ourselves and Man City in terms of money, the two big hitters in the league. So wouldn't it be great for them to build up a relationship early on and be like, oh, we'll do you a favour because maybe we'll return the favour and not so long, to come. And I think if we can guarantee Calvin Phillips some football, game time, I don't see why we wouldn't do it. And if Pep Guardiola's sending him there and Eddie Howe, he knows, it's Eddie Howe looking after him. Eddie Howe's going to get him, he'll sort his fitness out. 2, he's gonna really coach him and bring him on. Pep could then see it as, we'll bring him back in the summer, and he could come back, a new player. If not, could there be a negotiation where we keep him on? I don't know. But if City want to get his wages off the wage bill, why not? Suits us, suits them. They'll get a little loan fee for him, no doubt. I'd be interested.
That's what you're thinking.
I've ruled him out in terms of a permanent signing before, but on taking him on loan, why not? If we have it if we offload a few, if it's a case of wages and needing to slot in there, we have a few that we could offload that would free some of the wages there. So he's worth the gamble on a loan, for sure. And if it was to work out, then you never know after that. It could be a case that we want to try and sign him. But so yeah, why not on the loan? I consider that option.
I'll be honest with you. If it's a loan, and this was the additional question I was going to put to you, is that we've talked about a loan, and lots of people have talked about a loan. Even people in the chat have said about loans. and the fact that if you're loaning a player, you don't want to improve a player to send them back to their kind of parent club. But he could make a real difference if fit and under Eddie Howe with our team, particularly in that position. Now, look, it's not the right centre back that we want. It's not even such the right winger addition that the many fans would want, but it's a position that would allow Bruno, Sandro, Joe Linton to go and flourish in certain games with him being there and being able to sort of screen everything that's going on. He gets regular football. He gets, hopefully, fingers crossed, back to the ability that we know he can play at, which is why Man City were interested in him. I just thought it was an interesting link there. That City X have put out, and they're obviously a big account. They know their stuff. It's clear that Man City are keen to let him go. I don't know. So it was really interesting.
It's another option and another more cover for us as well. Like we have Sean Longstaff there also, but yeah, whether it's the direction they want to go in now or not.
It is an interesting one. Like you mentioned Sean Longstaff, but he tends to play more off the right.
Yeah.
Even in most games, he tends to play off the right. He never plays in the centre. It tends to be Bruno. But having Phillips can play there. He's played there for Leeds, where he sits in that sort of number 6 position. I just thought it was quite interesting. And look, I'm not saying we're going to sign him, but I put it out there because I thought, what if he's available, do we go for it? Do we try and secure a player of his ability? Because I know West Ham are linked with him. They're in Europe as well. But can we?
Chelsea linked to him.
They're linked with everything. Maybe Liverpool. To be fair, I wouldn't want him going there. I'll be honest with you, but I'd be surprised if Man City let Calvin Phillips go to Liverpool, who could be seen as a direct rival. I'd be shocked. I'd be very surprised by that. Yeah. But the other question I had for you boys, just before we begin to wrap up, you had this a while ago, Daz. Bruno's contract extension. What is going on with Bruno's contract extension? Do you think it's going to be announced soon? Do you think it's going to be announced later on in the season? Is it going to be announced at all? What are your thoughts, boys, on this situation with Bruno's contract?
For me, it's a strange one. I would have thought it would have been done in the summer. So where is the hold up really? It's very strange. Like Bruno wants to be here. I've no doubt about that. And we want to keep Bruno, so no brainer. Just get it done. You know, what is the stumbling block? That's what I'd like to know.
Exactly. What is the stumbling block? Chris, your thoughts on Bruno?
To be honest, this is a pretty easy one for me. I thought for a while that Bruno wouldn't sign his new contract until the window shut. Maybe he's the surprise on the 1st of September. We spoke about that as well, didn't we? Saying, there was a picture coming out of Bruno in his bucket hat and the retro Newcastle shirt. I don't know. Maybe they're saving it for that. Because for me, let's be honest, Bruno's new contract is going to put him as the top earner of the club. And if you're actively looking to bring in, new players, I'm not saying that we are definitely going to bring in new players, but let's say, for example, the club are thinking, if a last-minute deal comes up, we'd be interested. If we go and give Bruno Guimaraes a $200,000 a week contract tomorrow, if a player becomes available who we're interested in on, say, the 28th, 29th, 30th of August, and Bruno's just signed a $200,000 a week deal, that new player could come in and go, I'll have a bit of that. And the club are like, whoa, no. Like, he's the top earner. We're only going to go to 130, 140. Whereas if the club try and bring a player in on the 28th, 29th, 30th, and Bruno's still on 120, 130, then, that will help us in our negotiation of bringing the player in and going, listen, mate, you're not going to come in as top wage earner, settle down a bit. we can offer you 100, 110 or whatever. I think it just helps with the negotiation. I think it's all very tactical. And I firmly believe that either on the 1st or a few days after the 1st, Bruno will sign his new deal. And again, maybe this Adidas contract is part of that. I don't know, but I think they're delaying it very tactically because, like I say, if we offered the 200 grand, if we announced the 200 grand a week, Bruno, anyone coming in and go, oh, I want 150, I want 180, I want 250. I think we're setting ourselves up to fail. So I think Bruno will sign his new deal shortly after the window shuts.
Well, Chris, you're wrong because Lisa hasn't nailed it here. Bruno wants a barbecue deal in his contract. There you go. That's the real news.
Yeah. In Stu, I'm just going to steal the chat just for a second, as I apologise. Stu Amos says, do we think Bruno's contract is causing a bit of distraction? Lowe's saying his performances have dipped and coincides with the contract talks. Do we think that's maybe a reason, or do we think it's as kind of we've said after the window, sign the deal, done?
No, I don't think so, because it's not like he's on his last 6 months of his contract or something like that. He's got a number of years left anyway. It's just a bump up, and it's like in recognition of what he's done for us and what we want him to do for us in the future. So I don't think that would come into it. I would imagine, could be wrong, Bruno would just leave that to the agents and let them sort it out, and he'll sign off on it basically.
Same, Chris.
Yeah, I don't link this contract to Bruno's performances at all. For me, I think Stu raises a good point because some people may say that, and I'm not saying Stu's wrong, but for me, I think the reason maybe that Bruno isn't performing to the levels that we've seen him be capable of doing is either down to the position or maybe the fact that he's not 100% fit yet. Let's not forget, he got married in the summer. Maybe he just needs a few more games to really get ticking. Not forgetting as well, he's playing with new players. We've seen the partnership he's struck up with Tonali. That's only going to improve as time goes on. So I'm reserving judgment, but no, I don't think the two are linked. And Daz rightly says, he's got 3 years left on his deal. So I think it wouldn't surprise me if the deal was already agreed, but they just haven't announced it yet. We know how we like to delay announcements. So.
Yeah.
Super chat received.
Ooh.
Shout out to Soaps247. Thank you very much for the donation to the channel, Soaps. Very much.
You throughout the likes tonight, or tell everyone to subscribe and like right now. Do we?
Yes.
170 in the chat and nearly 200 throughout the show. We didn't even tell everybody to do it. Come on.
What are we doing? Amateurs here, amateur hour. Yeah. And you know what? Another thing we must do is we must give a shout out to our sponsors tonight as well. I'll do it now because I'll forget as you're thinking about what last things to say, lads. But a shout out to theradiatorshed.com and Russ and all his beautiful radiators. Oh, look we have the pictures back in this tab. Lovely radiators there. And there's the man himself. And there's Russ. So yeah, and also the install works. If you ever need to get your radiators installed, the install works, all part of Russ's company. Also a shout out to H2O Bathroom Design Co., the Northeast's largest supplier of Velcro and Botch bathroomware. Team Valley Gateshead, over 20 years established, ran by the family. Get down to the showroom on 11th Avenue, Team Valley State, Gateshead. And already the beautiful bathrooms that are not for in the showroom. So yeah, get down there and mention Loaded. You never know what'll happen.
Definitely. Boys, it's been a pleasure. Great to have Jacob on. Jacob Whitehead from The Athletic. Brilliant stuff tonight. Great opinions and a really, really good debut in there. Of course, as always, boys, it's been a pleasure to chat to you about all things Newcastle United. So, that's it from me.
How'd you like that? Will you play us on the piano, Chris?
How you like?